writing first chapters is hard. I should know. I spent a long time trying to find the best first chapter and hook for my book. I'm still not sure if it's the best one. So today, we're going to be talking about hooks and first chapters. So how do you start your story? Basically, it's complicated. But this video was the one you requested about a few months ago, and now it's here. Writing first chapters and hooks. This video is being brought to you by multiple different clones of me from across the centuries, including Kaidyn, who is certainly not somehow related to Shakespeare. And yeah, you'll have to find out what that means. Anyways, into the video! Hello, it's me, Tutankhamun, Pharaoh of Egypt. Apparently I'm supposed to die soon, according to Kaidyn from the future. But for now, I think it's time that I tell you where to start on our map. Let us start at the beginning. Before we go into hooks and things like that, it's important to know where to start your story. The common advice given is to start in the middle of things. The writer should consider starting the story in the middle of an event or happening, versus starting from the very, very, very beginning before that event has even happened. And I'm not talking about the catalyst or inciting incident that throws the character off into the endless desert to their deaths so they can... sorry. I just mean the middle of something. Take the beginning of Aragon by Christopher Paolini. We don't start when the Shade is suiting up and getting all his armor ready. We start just as the attack is happening. It makes the reader feel like they jumped in just at the right moment. This in itself can draw your reader in. But now, let's just finish off this sneaky part 1 and go to the next township of our frankly long journey, the town of Hooks. Hey, I'm Punk. Peace. The hook. Sounds simple, right? Start the story with a flashy action scene and get the reader immersed in your story. Well, not quite. Actually, really not quite. I mean, we all love Punk's music. It's just the punkiest. So how do you write a good hook? Let's look at some examples. It's said that people can go 40 days without food, 3 days without water, and about 35 seconds without finding meaning behind something, states Lisa Cron in her book Wired for Story, which I totally recommend for anyone interested in writing. It's got tons of great tips and little tidbits in the psychology of readers. Readers are constantly looking for meaning behind the words they are reading, whether consciously or not. So how do you word a hook/beginning sentence in a way that makes your reader ask these questions? Let's talk about the iconic first sentence of every fantasy nerd's favorite author, Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn. Ash fell from the sky. The reader wonders, why is ash falling from the sky? Did a volcano just erupt? Why? Readers are looking for the why, and if you give them sentences that make them want to find out why, you have yourself a solid beginning. If those first 5 words had been said a little differently, something like this. The ash mounts always spewed ash everywhere. This would be less interesting, and plus, it sets up a different tone to the story, which we'll get to in a bit, timestamp on the screen. It says basically the same thing, but it's worded differently. The reader has less questions to ask. It tells us why it's happening versus leaving it open for the reader to wonder. I'm not saying that's an awful beginning, but it doesn't pose as many questions. It tells us why the ash is falling from the sky that they always spewed after everywhere, and not making us wonder about it. I think my favorite hook by far is the beginning of Percy Jackson and the Olympians, The Lightning Thief, by Rick Riordan. It isn't even the first sentence, it's literally the chapter title. When a book begins with, Chapter 1, I accidentally vaporized my pre-algebra teacher, I'm already in. It sets your mind abuzz, and I don't think I need to tell you why. But as soon as I read that sentence for the first time, I was roped into the story instantly. And throughout Percy Jackson, Riordan delivers interesting and comical chapter titles consistently. There are so many ways to write a first sentence. The chapter title of Percy Jackson is a hook that sets up anticipation. You're waiting for this thing to happen, and by the time it does, you're already in the story. Or you could try Mistborn's approach, where Brandon Sanderson instantly places you in the world of the story. Another book that does something similar to Mistborn is Madeleine L'Engle's A Wrinkle in Time. Beginning with, It was a dark and stormy night. This first sentence is interesting. It shows you that you don't have to start with an action sequence, which isn't a bad thing, I might add, or some dramatic catalyst, but a somber and slightly fairy tale sounding beginning. It shows that not all beginnings have to be posing massive questions to the reader like, Will the hero survive? No more memes. Do you hear me? You're supposed to be doing a video, not a meme video. It uses the weather as a beginning. But hooks aren't all one sentence, which brings us to... Ciao, I'm Italian, Kaidyn, and I'm here to talk to you about building off the first sentence. I'll begin my part once my speech is completely al dente. Ow. Getting the reader hooked is important, but the stuff that comes after it is just as important. For part 3, I'm going to be showing you a bunch of examples of books that, in my opinion, did a good job of building off of their first sentences. I'll use the A Wrinkle in Time example again. Continuing on from It Was a Dark and Stormy Night, L'Engle shows the main character Meg huddled in a patchwork blanket. After describing this, she states, She wasn't usually afraid of the weather. It's not just the weather, she thought. It's the weather on top of everything else. On top of me. On top of Meg Murray doing everything wrong. The weather is used as a way to showcase her feelings, which I think is really cool. And that's why the stuff after the first sentence is important too. It adds and gives flavor. Another example of building off the first sentence is in Artemis Fowl. Beginning with, how does one describe Artemis Fowl? The narrator pulls you in by next saying, various psychiatrists have tried and failed. The main problem is Artemis's own intelligence. He bamboozles every test thrown at him. He has puzzled the greatest medical minds and sent many of them gibbering to their hospitals. He builds up our interest by stating the intrigue of him of the people around him. Who is this Artemis Fowl, we wonder? How does one describe Artemis Fowl wouldn't be enough on its own. It's what happens after it that continues to build up that wonder and what is happening here. When writing what comes after the first sentence, you might want to consider A. What you want to convey early on in the case of Artemis Fowl, he's intelligent and cunning, or B, where you want your emphasis to be. These two go hand in hand. Where you put your emphasis will signal to the reader that this is important. A lot of books do this. Take the legendary first sentence of J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were very proud to say that they were perfectly normal, thank you very much. Is a very good first line, but the stuff that comes after it is important too. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. The reader will see this emphasis on them being involved in anything mysterious or strange, and will begin to question, why is that important? Why is the emphasis on this particular part of them? Why?
Why?
What I'm saying here is that it's not just the hook, but what comes after it that matters. All the emphasis on them being perfectly normal makes us wonder, and try to find meaning behind the words they are saying. Ciao! Now, there is no one way to write a beginning. It varies depending on the style and genre of the book. So for part 4, in the study of genre style, we're going to be looking at how the beginning can differ depending on the genre and book type. In Lord of the Rings, the first sentence is, when Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special significance, there was much talk in Hobbiton. To some, this sentence may not be the most grabbing, but it doesn't mean it's not a good beginning. And here's one thing that caught my eye when I first opened up Lord of the Rings. The use of an in-world word. In this case, 11th. This puzzles the reader slightly. 11th, what could that mean? It sure puzzles me. If you're writing a book set in a different world, consider adding one of your made-up words to include some intrigue. Anyways, this example is more poetic, easygoing way to start a story. It is the kind of beginning a story like Lord of the Rings would have, considering how long, poetic, and beautiful Lord of the Rings is. But this wouldn't be the case for, say, a thriller. A thriller would begin with a running start, as John Truby calls it in his book, The Anatomy of Story. A thriller is meant to make people turn the pages and keep them engaged to the very end. David Baldacci, a thriller writer, says himself in his masterclass that you have to grab the reader by the collar and hurtle them through the next 450 pages. Now, I'm not a huge thriller reader, so it'll be hard for me to give you good thriller examples, but I can dissect an example of a book I know has a running start. The book being Refugee by Alan Gratz. Crack. Bang. Joseph Landau shot straight up in bed, his heart racing. That sound, it was like someone had kicked in the front door. Or had he dreamed it? It starts off with short, quick sentences with urgency, foreshadowing the action-only paragraphs later. It's like quick punches, fast, abrupt punctuation. Compare this to, say, the beginning of Dune by Frank Herbert. In the week before their departure to Arrakis, when all the final scurrying about had reached a nearly unbearable frenzy, an old crone came to visit the mother of the boy, Paul. The difference between this example and Refugee is that Herbert uses the same number of words, well, actually 3 more, in one sentence as Gratz does in 5 sentences. The beginning of Refugee feels like short, swift punches, while Dune starts with a more intricate, longer sentence. Much like, the Lord of the Rings example I showed you earlier. But we've only examined some high fantasy, a really long sci-fi novel, and a historical fiction. What about just fiction? In The Thing About Jellyfish, it starts like this. A jellyfish. If you watch it long enough, it begins to look like a heart beating. It doesn't matter what kind. The blood-red Atolla with its flashing siren lights. The frilly flower hat variety. Or the near-transparent moon jelly. Aurelia aurita. It's their pulse, the way they contract swiftly, then release. Like a ghost heart. A heart you can see straight through. Right into some other world where everything you ever lost has gone to hide. Of course, that wasn't a sentence, but it is a beginning. It's actually the beginning of the, prologue, you could call it? But it is still the first thing the readers see. The first chapter, if you could call it that, not only hooks you with the vivid analogies of jellyfish, but also sets up the main character's mind very well, as we can see from this section only a paragraph later. Mrs. Turton says that if you lived to be 80 years old, your heart would have beat 3 billion times. I was thinking about that, trying to imagine a number that large. 3 billion. Count back 3 billion hours and modern humans don't exist. Just wild-eyed cave people, all hairy and grunting. 3 billion years and life barely exists. And yet there's their heart, doing its job all the time, one beat after the next, all the way up to 3 billion. But only if you live that long. This gives us a window into Susie's unique way of thinking. Her mind always finds significance in the details. Where fantasy books often have tons of cool world building, magic, etc., that you could highlight in the first chapter, in fiction you can introduce characters more vividly. I'm not saying you can't have a fantasy book with a beginning that focuses on characters. You could begin your story however you want. You're the writer. Do whatever you think your story fits your story best.
I am Lord Cheeseburger. Before we go through the ways where tone works, I'm first going to identify where it doesn't. You see, when writing a book, it's easy to write something like, "A shot rang out," just to grab the reader's attention, even while that has no relevance to the story. The co-authors of Technique in Fiction, a book on writing, state the following.
A writer has to discriminate wisely between the attention-getting device that soon becomes fairly irrelevant to the story, and the beginning that genuinely gathers the reader into the arms of the story. Try coming up with the beginning that showcases the tone your story is going to be told in. Remember what I said way back at the beginning of this video, when I was talking about Mistborn's beginning and how the ash mounts always spewed ash everywhere isn't quite as interesting, but is also written for a differently toned story? Well, that's what we're going to talk about now. Mistborn is a complex story with quite a lot of darker themes. Having the beginning say, "The ash mounts always spewed ash everywhere," signals to the reader that the story will be a very character-driven story, considering that the first sentence sounds like someone complaining about the ash, like an internal monologue. I'm not saying you can tell everything from the first sentence, but this can signal to the reader subconsciously. It could also make your prose seem more incohesive. Imagine if a Berenstain Bears book started with, "Smoke curled out of the chimney, curling like the tendrils of an unforgiving sandworm, while everyone ran in fright. Fear is the mind killer." You see what I mean? Let's look at the first few sentences from Trenton Lee Stewart's The Mysterious Benedict Society. In a city called Stonetown, near a port called Stonetown Harbor, a boy named Rennie Muldoon was preparing to take the test. It was the second test of the day. The first had been in an office across town. After that, he was told to come here, to the Monk Building on 3rd Street, and to bring nothing but a single pencil and a single rubber eraser, and to arrive no later than 1 o'clock. If he happened to be late or brought 2 pencils or forgot his eraser or in any other way deviate from the instructions, he would not be allowed to take the test, and that would be that. In the first 4 sentences, Stewart establishes the general tone of the story by using very precise phrases like, after that he would be told to come here to the Monk Building on 3rd Street and bring nothing but a single pencil, a single rubber eraser, etc. It shows us that this story will be full of precise things, which foreshadows all the puzzles and quizzes and things like that come later. So, what I'm trying to say here is that the way you write your beginning can help establish the tone of the rest of the story. For example, in Wings of Fire, it starts with a rather dark tone. A character death, in fact. But it's not written like, say, The Lord of the Rings, where, say, it would take a lot more narrative space. Sutherland finishes the scene in only a few pages. Instead of writing a really long, elaborate prose, she writes it like the rest of the story is written, not spending too much time on beautiful prose work like, say, Frank Herbert would. Okay, so for our final visit to the capital city, books I gotta read. Yeah, books I gotta read. I've given you loads of examples for big beginnings of a story. But do you know what they all have in common? They're all books I've read. Which is a good thing. I mean, it would be kind of dishonest if I may give examples of books I'd never read. But how does my analysis change or differ if I don't know what happens in the end and how the beginning foreshadows this and how this means that? Let's look at a book I haven't read and make an analysis on the first chapter, which isn't that long. It's only, 4 pages. The book under examination is A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman, the author of And Every Morning the Way Home Gets Longer and Longer, which I have a review for linked up in the corner. But anyways, let's get into it. Ove is 59. He drives a Saab. He is the kind of man who points at people he doesn't like the look of, as if they were burglars and his forefinger was a policeman's torch. He stands at the counter of a shop where Japanese car owners come to purchase white cables. Ove eyes the sales assistant for a long time before shaking a medium-sized box at him. "So this is one of those pads, is it?" he demands. The assistant, a young man with a single-digit body mass index, looks ill at ease. He visibly struggles to control his urge to snatch the box out of Ove's hands. "Yes, exactly, an iPad. Do you think you could stop shaking it like that?" Now from this, I can tell that Ove is somewhat harsh. He doesn't know much about tech stuff. But it's the line. He's the kind of man who points at people he doesn't like the look of. Which is just really interesting. This is addressed a little bit more later in the chapter, but before I show you that, I want to show you one more section just a little bit past the one I read to you. "Is it good? Is it a good computer?" The assistant scratches his chin. "I mean, yeah, it's really good, but it depends on what sort of computer you want." Ove glares at him. "I want a computer, a normal bloody computer." Silence descends over the 2 men for a short while. The assistant clears his throat. We can definitely see that the assistant is frightened of Ove, and that Ove has very narrow vision when it comes to listening to others. He is also quick to anger. This is only the 2nd page of the book, and Bachman has already established a ton. His beginning is very character-driven too. Ove is interesting, even if he is a bit intimidating. But finally, I want to read you the section where Ove uses his finger like a police torch. Someone else is helping him right now by the counter, by the way. Hi, how can I help you? Ove drills his police finger torch into the counter. I want a computer. The colleague no longer looks quite as happy. He gives the first sales assistant an insinuating glance as if to say he'll pay him back for this. In the meantime, the first sales assistant mutters, I can't take this anymore, I'm going to lunch. Lunch, snorts Ove. That's all people care about nowadays. I'm sorry, says the colleague and turns around. Lunch, he sneers, then tosses the box onto the counter and swiftly walks out. And that is the end of the chapter. This clarifies everything I said earlier. Ove is quick to anger, intimidating, narrow-minded, etc. And I'm interested to read more about him, to find out why he's like this, and if he can be helped. I can't wait to read the rest of the book.
Hello, I'm Granny Kaidyn, and I'd like to welcome you to the end of your journey. Good job, I hope you enjoyed the ride. And what are you doing? Hey, stop, what are you doing? Hey, stop it, oh dear, stop.
Hello, it's me again. This is the longest video I've ever made. And it took a ton of work to do. I spent a ton of time researching it after I put the poll out. I actually did a ton of research before I put the poll out, asking if people wanted me to do this video, and everyone wanted me to do this video, which is great. And it took a ton of work, and yeah, thank you for sticking around to the end. If you want to see more videos like this, let me know. I'm always open for suggestions. And yeah, check out all these brilliant authors I mentioned in the video. And yeah, I'm really... Thank you for sticking to the end. I know these videos are long and strenuous, but there are gonna be more of them. And I couldn't figure out how to discuss this large topic in under this time. I could have talked way longer and given way more examples. I might even make an extended version once with sometime with like more examples in it. Because this had kind of more limited examples, just because you can learn so much by looking at so many different authors' examples. But yeah, that's all from me. I hope you enjoy, and never stop reading.